early hours of 25th of December, 4 BC. Probably the best way to fill you in on the latest calamity in our catalogue of disasters is to tell you the story as it happened. As planned, once we knew the weary traveller was Joseph, I flew down into the courtyard of the David's Rest Hotel and waited for him to arrive. Sephram was to wait in his room until I called him. When Joseph appeared through the gateway, he was exhausted and very tense. Mary was in the middle of a contraction and pleaded with him to stop, but he refused firmly. Math greeted me with great relief and was about to speak when Firmian interjected. She's fully dilated, on the brink of stage 2, and we have absolutely no time to waste. Hagog appeared to be in some sort of a trance, watching each footfall of the donkey. Joseph knocked frantically at the hotel door, leaving Mary to slide off the donkey cautiously on her own. Hagog removed the overworked beast to the box of hay that was propped up against one wall of the courtyard. The sleepy-eyed hotel owner opened the door and quickly asserted that all his rooms were full beyond capacity. While Joseph began to explain their situation, Mary gave a great yell and added, "Here comes another one, Joseph!" Meanwhile, I gave a spirit whistle to Sephram, who appeared, bags in hand, and announced that he had to leave immediately to be in Jerusalem by sunrise. Joseph begged the owner for a room of some kind where Mary could deliver her child. Sephram replied cheerfully, "How wonderful! Not only have you woken me up when I was in danger of oversleeping, but you can have my room all to yourselves. It's quite clean. I'm a bit fussy that way." Math is of the opinion that Sephram performed his part perfectly, but I think he could have done without lying. He will definitely be in quarantine when he gets home. Whatever the merits of Sephram's performance, it failed. The owner of the hotel destroyed months of preparation with one sentence. "It's already been paid for by someone else." Joseph tried to argue his case, but I could tell from the older man's cold spirit there was no hope. With just one word of command from me, Math, Hagog and Firmian, along with the 3 guardian angels and Sephram, who dumped his human clothes and belongings in a drainage ditch, flew off round Bethlehem looking for somewhere suitable for the son to be born. Math quickly had an inspired idea and called us together to look at his discovery. The Bethlehem Central Synagogue is a large stone-built hall with grand columns in the Greek style. We quickly agreed that it was the ideal place for this great event. Math suggested that it had been quite possibly our boss's original idea, but that we'd all been too occupied with the Sephram plan to listen properly. I left Math and Sephram to prepare a suitable bed for the birth while the rest of us raced back to the David's Rest. When we flew into the small courtyard, we met the saddest scene of the whole disastrous campaign. Mary was lying, curled up into a tight ball against the whitewashed wall of the hotel. She was covered in blood. Joseph was seated next to her, blank-faced, methodically tearing one of his tunics into strips of cloth. And the donkey was tied up in the farthest corner of the yard because the baby was lying, sucking his fist in the animal's hay box. For a long time, we stopped, watching in dumb silence. After months of careful planning for the most important event in the history of the universe, this is all we have achieved. I shudder to think what my boss will say. Next morning. My gloomy meditations were interrupted by the sound of singing. Without warning, Archangel Raphael and his angelic choir descended on the tatty yard in full song. Joseph, although still awake, was oblivious to the invasion. Mary stirred in her sleep, and before I had a chance to glance in the direction of the hay box, Firmian leapt up and screamed as loud as he was able, "Shut the heaven up!" Then, when the music had stopped, he added more calmly, "The baby is asleep." At this, the baby in question promptly woke up and began to cry, which woke Mary. Joseph stopped his cloth tearing to deal with the situation. Raphael looked towards me awkwardly and mouthed, "We've got to sing. Our boss booked the choir himself." I replied rather crossly, "Well, not here. We've quite enough to cope with as it is." Sephrim intervened. "Oh, there'll be some night watchmen out on the hillside with the sheep. Why don't you go and sing to them?" I'd completely forgotten that Sephrim was still with us and asked him to lead the choir to a more appreciative audience. Peace again. Briefly. Raphael, whose joy at tonight's birth was untempered by its squalid circumstances, was so bubbling with enthusiasm for the occasion that he coerced his bewildered audience into paying us a visit. And dutifully they came, a shamble of shepherds. 4 ill-kempt, hairy heads peeped round the gateway of the inn-yard just as the sky was brightening with pre-dawn light. By and large, human beings cannot see angels unless we make a considerable effort to become visible. One of the shepherds, however, looked straight at me and said, "Ah, you again. Where's this baby then?" I was so startled to be mistaken for the oh-so-smooth Raphael that I did not manage to reply before a younger specimen of the same species exclaimed, "There it is, you dumb goat, wrapped up in strips of cloth and lying in a manger just like the fairy told us." On another occasion, to be mistaken for one of the frivolous spirits of idle legend would have been exceedingly upsetting. But when you've just reached the ocean bed of despair, you can't sink any lower. I scowled at the intruders, but Mary and Joseph were pleased to have visitors and proudly showed off the baby, answering a string of apparently obligatory questions about Jesus' size, weight, hometown. To see these rough and filthy herdsmen transformed into gentlemen by the presence of a small baby was a revelation. Perhaps the son's life on earth will not be quite as bleak as I'd presumed. In the end, Joseph gently reminded the men that they had sheep to care for and ushered them back out into the street. As the scruffy group passed me, the oldest of the shepherds looked directly at me for the second time and asked, "Are you lot going to come and sing for us again?" He did not wait for a reply, but went on his way whistling one of Raphael's tunes. Somehow the shepherd's visit dispelled the cloud of gloom that had hung over the inn-yard all night. Since they left, Mary, Joseph and the baby have all slept. The people of Bethlehem are now waking up, oblivious to the fact that they have just missed the most remarkable event of my boss's many creations. The baby, I should probably tell you, is called Jesus. The name was chosen by his father, my boss, not Joseph, and weighed approximately 7 pounds, I'm told. It's now time for me to return to my office and leave Math in charge again. I shall have to report to my boss as soon as I get back. That evening, as Earth time would understand it. Once I had Sephrim safely detained as far as possible from the universe, I spent most of the day with my boss. I told him in precise detail everything that had happened last night. Well, he knew it already, of course, but he likes to hear his creatures telling their own stories. All the way through my account, he restricted me to a straight telling of the facts as I saw them, and it was only when I'd reached the very end of the drama that he looked straight at me and asked, "Well?" My boss is often frustratingly economical with words, and I knew that this was an invitation to give my own opinion. "I'm sorry," I began, reciting the short speech I'd carefully prepared for this moment. "It was an awful mess, and it was my fault. I should have used a more orthodox approach." I fell silent, hoping that he might say something, yet dreading what he might say. He said nothing. As always happens to me in such silences, I couldn't bear it for long and spoke again. Have I completely fouled up your plan? My boss smiled. Not a frustrated smile, nor an amused one. It was a huge, beaming smile of the kind that only he and his son can give. In the light of that smile, the scattered pieces of my story fell effortlessly into place. The struggle, the distress, the humiliation, the awfulness, and the sheer panic of the last few days in creation's brief history all took shape in my mind. For a moment, I saw the whole episode from my boss's perspective. The human tragedy that I'd just witnessed. That was the plan. For some while, my boss and I cried and laughed and cried. Then I left him alone to consider the helpless bundle of atoms and energy that his son has just become.